Hello, I'm Ian Humphreys and welcome back to UKMFA TV and your audio podcast too. And today we've got a very important discussion all about the UK's Assisted Dying Bill, which is due to have its third reading on the 25th of April this year. It may be delayed, but you'll hear that from the conversation that's about to take place. And that conversation is a little bit of me, but mainly our CEO, Dr. Elizabeth Evans, together with the lawyer Clare Harrison. So I'm not going to hang about here for too long. Let's go and join the conversation. Welcome to another broadcast by the UK Medical Freedom Alliance, the UK's most recognised and respected organisation advocating for every individual's right to informed consent, bodily autonomy and medical choice. We are the UK's voice of ethical medicine. Well, hi Claire, hi Liz, thanks so much again for coming on and having this very important conversation. We're now getting to the next reading of the Assisted Dying Bill, so this conversation couldn't be better timed really. And I've done some reading myself and I can see exactly the kind of topics that we need to cover, but I'm going to leave it to the two of you, I think, the majority of the time to unpick things and raise the red lines that keep popping up, that I know that we really don't want to cross. But anyway, I'll hand it over to you, and perhaps Claire, you could start maybe with just telling us where we are right now in terms of the bill.
So the committee stage is now ended, even though they could have had a couple of more sessions, I think, before the recess in Parliament, but the committee stage is now ended, so we're heading towards what we call the third reading. There's a little bit of confusion about when that third reading will be, which popped up yesterday. Originally, I was led to believe, when you look at the calendar, it was going to be on the 25th of April, but now some people are talking about it being in May. Now, we need to keep a close eye on that because we need to know, obviously, when the third reading is going to be. To all intents and purposes, I'm treating it as it's going to be happening on the 25th of April. However, if we find out anything further down the line, then, we'll know the date's moved. To try and cover everything that has happened in the committee is an impossibility. And even if you go and look at the transcripts, I think, Liz, you've probably found this for the committee, the sittings that they've had, it's very hard to piece together that X has been changed and Y has then been changed back or whatever, because it's not in any kind of decent order, is it, for you? You have to go each day and look and then compare to the next day. So it's been quite a mammoth job to trawl through, but there's been some really excellent reporting on this by Right to Life, hasn't there, Liz?
Yeah, and Care Not Killing. So if you go to their Twitter feed, they've both clipped some really key sort of little exchanges between the supporters and the opponents, or just really great little speeches, particularly from people like Danny Kruger, has been absolutely outstanding. I mean, I don't know how he has kept on top of the bill, but I watched. So as you say, I mean, it's very hard going through transcripts to work out what's going on. So I ended up probably watching about 10 hours of hearings, trying to catch up and trying to I'm really glad I did it, because actually it revealed what an intelligent conversation was, and points were being put by the opponents of the bill. I mean, so as I said, Danny Kruger was incredible, and he knew everything about the bill. He was able to argue on all the points, and Naz Shah, who is a Labour MP, was excellent. Rebecca Paul was also excellent. So it was worth watching. But I think what it really revealed was how utterly flawed this bill is, and how many holes are in this bill. But also the lack of will or of the proponents of Kim Ledbetter and her crew to actually try to remedy those holes and actually make the bill safer. So you know, so many amendments, some excellent amendments have been put forward, which actually would have made it far more tight. You know, you would have had it would have really kept it to a very small number of people, you know, who really were desperate for this and who were within a certain, you know, criteria. But instead, you know, every time an amendment was put forward, it was voted down. You know, even things like you must ask the person why they want to die, that was voted against. And you just think, but why would you not think that should be a necessary part, or that you don't raise it with 16 and 17-year-olds? I mean, they're children. You would have thought if they really wanted the bill to go through, Kim Ledbetter, she would have done everything in her power to make it the strongest safeguards in the world, which is what we were promised. And maybe thought, you know what, well, if we want this to expand, we'll do it down the line. But I think they've shot themselves in the foot, because they have shown themselves not to be acting in the best interest, really, of anybody. I mean, I don't know, what was your take on that, Claire?
I think you're absolutely right that had this bill been for the purpose which it was argued to be for, just for a very narrow group of people that only have 6 months to live, that are suffering dreadfully, in unremitting pain, etc., those safeguards, which were very, very reasonable, ask somebody why they want to die, don't discuss it with somebody that is under 18 and for all intents and purposes hasn't got capacity. I don't mean that there's anything wrong with their brain, but in lots of things, you know, you can't do anything until you're 18. All of those things would have been included, including, which we didn't get, Ledbetter promised that there would be no remote appointments to discuss this. That amendment was not allowed, so you could do it by Zoom. She was even showed how it had gone wrong in other countries by that, you know, doing it remotely, but again, that amendment was shot down. And I think you're absolutely right. I think we can see from the committee stage how, actually, if this bill came in just as it even was drafted, even if all of these questions hadn't been answered, that the very thing that we were worried about, which is what we called the slippery slope, the expansion of it, would happen. And I said right from the beginning, I don't think that this safeguards that are in the bill are safeguards. Now, one of those safeguards, of course, was, if people remember and they go back to our first chat, was that you would have a High Court judge that would sign off on this, okay? Now, I said right from the beginning, it's not going to work. They haven't got the capacity. It will just become a rubber stamping exercise. Now, they realised that at committee stage. So, but instead of doing anything about that to tighten it up or just say, well, I'm sorry, that it's that serious, it has to be like that, they just got rid of the court. Oh yeah, we won't be able to cope, so we won't have a court then, we won't have a High Court judge, we'll have a panel. And that panel doesn't have to compel anybody to give any evidence on oath or anything like that. We don't really know how that panel's going to be operating, because it seems to be a bit quasi-judicial, but without any kind of comeback on them. And it's all become even more of a mess in that regard. And we've even had, because the panel was supposed to be, I think a social worker, wasn't it? And was one a psychiatrist or psychologist? And then I think another was a senior legal person or something like that.
Yeah.
Now the social workers representatives and psychiatrists representatives have said, but we haven't got the manpower and the time to sit on these panels, so it will still be a rubber stamping exercise, but worse, it will be a rubber stamping exercise that probably hasn't got the transcripts like it has in court, hasn't got the oversight like it has with a High Court judge, hasn't got the comeback. So that was taken out really quite early, wasn't it, that High Court judge bit?
Yeah, and I think, you know, what Danny Kruger made a really good point. He said, yes, we want a multidisciplinary approach to this, but this is at the wrong stage. This panel is not giving a clinical assessment. You haven't got your social worker and psychiatrist there actually meeting with the patient, taking a history, looking into their home life, none of that. So what does he say? He said it was a quasi multidisciplinary team at the wrong stage in the process and for the wrong purpose.
He's
so you've
right.
almost pretended that you've got all these this multidisciplinary team involved, but it's at the point where they're just basically, as you say, rubber stamping, basically saying yes or no that this is happening. But there's a great table that Dan Hitchens, who's a journalist, has done also a great Twitter feed. He's been following this closely. So they only have to actually speak to one of the two doctors and the patient, but nobody else at all. So the second doctor doesn't get spoken to, but also there's no, it's only hearing from them. They don't have to be asked questions. And the family cannot apply to give any evidence, raise concerns. There's no process for them to be involved in this sort of panel. So it's completely, how can you possibly, meet an unknown person on Zoom or even audio link? It doesn't even have to be a video link, which does kind of bring into question identity. There's all sorts of, how are you even going to, this is not a safe system in the digital age.
But also, who else is in the room?
Well, that is one of the things that, listen, there are more stringent safeguards on somebody making a will than there are for somebody applying for assisted dying the way that this bill has been drafted. And you make a good point on that, Liz, because as lawyers, it's know your client, make sure that the person who is saying I am Claire is Claire, so check, and make sure that they're not under any duress or undue influence. Now, if you're just on a telephone call, even on a video call, you can't tell who's out of shot and what's happening, and you're also getting a snapshot, you're not getting an overview of what daily life is like. And if you're not taking evidence from other family members as to, well, sometimes this person might appear as if they're in control, but actually they're actually in a really awful relationship that's quite abusive. So there's all of that kind of stuff, which when you make a legal document for somebody, you have to cover. We've essentially been told with this bill, you don't need to worry about that. You don't need to meet any of the other family. The family can't even ask, can we come and give some evidence? You don't have to ask why somebody wants it. And they even said, I can't remember who was it, it might have been Kit Malthouse, I don't know. It's none of our business why people want it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that was
it's shocking because
somebody who said that.
Right.
It was an extreme position on autonomy. That I think this is what came across when you listen to the supporters of the bill. They believe in the complete autonomy of a person, in the sense that their life and death does not impact anyone else, or there is nobody else who has any sort of say in that. And I think that's actually quite a cold and callous approach to humanity, because
it's also a lie, Liz, given the last 5 years when people had their body autonomy stripped away from them, and they were so they can't, it's not true.
no, but to actually take out the family, who are the people who have the most to lose and who are the most invested, are the ones, and maybe in some cases people's families don't love them, but we have to trust a system that it could weed that out. And surely the more evidence you have, the more likely you are to weed out problems than if you just refuse to take evidence from anyone and just assume. As I watched this horror show of the hearings, I just felt like they wanted as many people as possible to be allowed to have assisted dying. That was what came across. It was like, we cannot afford, the most important thing is that, we make the criteria as wide as possible, rather than trying to safeguard the vulnerable and to prevent wrongful deaths. And listen, you only put in something that has no safeguards and is very loose and has not
the impression that I got from it all was that nobody needed to take the time to investigate in any case why that case was before them, as long as there was something written down that they had a terminal illness and less than 6 months, which they tried to push to forward to 12 months, didn't they? Less than 12 months. So you only do that when you actually do want as many people as possible on a conveyor belt, when you don't want to narrow the scope to the actual people that they said that this was about. And, you know, we are now in the position that it came out in the committee hearings, somebody who is diabetic is within the scope. Somebody who has anorexia is within the scope. You know, we're not talking about somebody that has got some really awful disease like motor neurone or something like that. It's as wide as those things. And I'm grateful to the committee stage and what we saw and what we heard, because it just confirmed all of my concerns. But I was also horrified, like you, at what I was seeing. And you are right about Danny Kruger, Naz Shah, and I wouldn't normally say this, and I think we've had this conversation before where I said I wouldn't normally say to people, your MP's the best person to go to try and deal with this. But in this instance, it really is the case, because I do think we do have some really good MPs on this issue that have really looked into it. And also we've got a very narrow margin of the yes vote on the second reading was only, I think, 52 or 51, something like that. So we had I think it was 325 to 275.
No, it was 55.
55. And so all you need now for that to fail is 28 MPs.
Yeah.
And you know, that's why with these committee hearings that are recorded, that you could watch back to back 10 hours, you do have the transcripts, you do have the what's the group, Liz, that you said earlier, is it Right to Life or
Care Not Killing?
Care Not Killing. They've got an awful lot of information and an awful lot of sound. You know, any MP is not going to find it hard, if they haven't looked at this in detail since the second reading, to go back and think, well, hang on. And I think that there was a really big kind of, well, we'll say yes because we know it's going to committee, we want to give it a chance, and then we'll see if the safeguards are really there. And I think it's been revealed that they're not. So I really encourage people to get in touch with their MPs and send this information to them. Go, you know, on Care Not Killing or Right to Life or UK Medical Freedom Alliance, even my articles, look at what has happened, and then there's template letters, you've got one, Liz, that people can use, and just ask your MP to look at this and ask, are we really heading down the road that we're going to allow, because this will be a mess. Can you imagine? There's no right of appeal for family to say, I want to go to court and appeal to stop this. It does not exist. The only appeal that you have is the person that wants the assisted dying, if they're refused, to go and appeal it. There isn't a reverse appeal, so there's no safety mechanism. Can you imagine trying to deal with this after somebody has died and they didn't have capacity, but the panel didn't pick it up? They were in an abusive relationship, but the panel didn't pick it up. Who is going to deal with this? Where are we going to end up in the court? Who is going to be liable?
Please consider donating to the UKMFA. We are really grateful for all donations, no matter how small. Your donations enable us to continue to lobby for your right to informed consent and medical freedom to be upheld, and to provide resources to educate and empower the public. There are multiple options for donating. One is that you can scan the QR code that's on this video right now, or you can go to the link that is featured in the description below this video, or you can go onto our website and contribute via donor box, or you can buy us a coffee. It's
actually terrifying, and I think even if you support assisted dying, this is absolutely not the bill. This bill needs to be torn up because, you know, it's just so full of holes. There were so few things they were prepared to really nail down. It was quite interesting. So just details about, like, what will a doctor do if the patient has taken the poison and is suffering complications. And they just didn't want to discuss it. They didn't want to have any amendments as to, the doctor must call an ambulance, for example. Kim Ledbetter said, well, they should be asked beforehand, but basically the doctor can't intervene. But like telling a doctor not to intervene, and yet they are obliged to be in the building where this death is happening. They don't even have to be in the room. I mean, how does that keep anybody safe if they start choking or, whatever might happen, or they're in agony or something goes wrong? And the doctor's not even obliged to be in the room. So there were all these amendments coming in saying, we need to really think about the practicality of, what happens, what if this happens, what if that happens? The doctor needs to have a really clear framework that they know exactly what to do. And basically it was just like, no, we just leave it to the experts, they're a professional, they can decide. That is not a way to actually draw up legislation, I don't believe. That's what the point of the committee stage, I thought, was to actually tighten everything up, not to loosen it. And things like the drugs that they're going to use, they didn't want to stipulate even who would be regulating that or writing the protocols. It's like nothing has been set in stone, and everything's, I don't know whether, Claire, that means that then if, say, the bill went through in its current form, then ministers down the line can basically fill the holes without any sort of debate. Is that
there are Henry VIII powers in the bill that allow for what we call the delegated legislation. I can't remember exactly what sections they're in. I think there's one that you wouldn't strictly call a Henry VIII power, but it does allow for delegated legislation. But there definitely is one in there. And that's the problem with that is, like you said, it allows then the government, the executive, to come in, or ministers, and write statutory instruments, secondary legislation, with no parliamentary oversight, or very little parliamentary oversight, no public awareness a lot of time, if you go and look at how many statutory instruments we've got, and then your changes come in. Henry VIII clauses themselves allow primary legislation to be altered or repealed without further parliamentary approval. Now, that I've long argued that that's really dangerous, and the Hansard Society have got lots of stuff about that if anybody wants to go and look at it. But you can see that we could be in a situation where we've got a loose bill, and all the bills that we get now seem to be very loose, where actually those holes are then filled by the government at any given time in the way that the government decides is best. To not even know the drugs, how they're going to be regulated, it's crazy at this stage to be thinking of putting some legislation through. We don't know what the medications is. We don't know, therefore, we can't have an argument about what the adverse effects of those medications might be on the dying process, which comes down to the suffering point that you are talking about, Liz, which has been some chatter, and I think it was Dan Hitchens himself on X, shared an article about some concerns that the drugs being used actually could cause like a suffocation type death, which could be extremely painful and extremely drawn out. But we don't know what those drugs are. But he was alluding to them being some of the drugs that we've already got concerns about, given end of life medications, which could be perhaps benzodiazepines or opioids or whatever. We don't know in what combination. Like you said, we don't know who's going to regulate all of that, and who is going to be looking at the panel as well is one of my concerns. Do the panel members have extensive background checks? It's not beyond the realms of possibility that lawyers are crooked, social workers are crooked, doctors are crooked. It happens. There's that kind of thing in every walk of life. How will that be managed? Will they be subject to regular reviews? Will they have any training about anything? Are they just expected to just sit there and go off their own whatever? Is there going to be a framework, a standard, whatever? And of course the problem is that under the Mental Capacity Act they've got to start from the premise that the person has capacity, because that's what the law is. unless they prove otherwise. Now, if they can't ask them why they want to die, how the heck can you check the capacity?
Yeah, and actually, if you look at the drafting, the threshold for capacity has to be that the doctor is only 51% certain of capacity, and about the same for coercion. That it's in the doctor's best knowledge that this is the clear and settled wish of the patient. But the thing is, if you're not asking for information, if you don't have any information there, then actually anything's to your best knowledge. The less information you have, the better, to be able to. So yeah, there doesn't seem to be an acknowledgement that you need to be careful on this stuff. And actually, there was some discussion which I watched, and I don't know if you picked up on this. They're now talking about having an advocate,
yes,
to help people who have learning disabilities or autism to understand what they're consenting to. Now, I'm just like, what? You're literally kidding me. Like, somebody with learning disabilities, who then presumably by most normal standards doesn't have full capacity, but they're
without
saying,
having a test at least,
an advocate to explain it in really simple terms why they want to die. That doesn't sound to me like somebody with autism who's going, I can't take this anymore, and I've thought about this, and I want. This sounds like a means where people can very easily be coerced or pushed into something which they just cannot understand.
I mean, it is so opposing to everything really that's in the Mental Capacity Act about capacity and assessing it for anything to do with lifetime. For wills, we use a different test called the Banks and Goodfellow test. But if I was, say, making a lasting power of attorney for somebody that had autism, I would already be at the starting point in the Mental Capacity Act of saying this person has a disturbance or impairment of the mind. So I therefore have to go on to the second test. And that isn't getting somebody else. I wouldn't be allowed to have somebody else in the room. I'd have to make... yes, there can be communication problems, which doesn't necessarily mean lack of capacity, and you have to find ways that you can assist with that person's to communicate, whether that's by you probably know, Liz, there's different methods that you can use for communication depending on what somebody has wrong with them, but you can't have somebody else in there answering for them or advocating for them. It has to be their settled wish, and they have to be rational when we're making legal documents into why they want to do something or not do something. I just was blown away at how this almost seems to be in direct opposition to all of the other laws that we have around mental capacity and actually making documents, which are nowhere near as important as deciding whether or not to end your life.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, and of course they'd rejected an amendment to just exclude people with autism and learning disabilities from this. And then what's going to compound it is the fact that the doctors are allowed to offer unprompted assisted suicide. In fact, and Claire, you and I we've discussed a bit over the last week, is it mandatory for the doctor to bring it up the minute you're eligible under the law, the minute you have a terminal diagnosis with less than 6 months to live? It's really unclear as to whether the doctor is then allowed to offer it unprompted or whether they're kind of mandated to offer it. So you could find yourself, you or I, who obviously have spoken out, we're totally against assisted dying in theory, let alone in practice, but we could find it being offered to us, and surely we always assumed that this would be for the people who were basically putting their hand up and saying, I want assisted dying. I believe in assisted dying, and I've had enough of my life now. I've only got 3 months to live. I'm in unbearable pain. Please just put me out of my misery.
Yeah. And
then, so then at least that sort of narrows the group down. But now they've basically done it that it's going to impact all of us because we could all be offered it. And that's when you're in a very vulnerable situation, that's a horrific thing for somebody who fundamentally does not want to have it or would never have considered it. But then that's going to put real doubt in their minds, isn't it? And it's the burden thing. Well,
yeah, I think if I went to the doctor hoping for a treatment, or something to alleviate that I wanted to live out my life and die a natural death, if I can put it like that. I'm not saying that you don't have drug intervention and things like that to help with pain, but can you imagine being in the position where, especially maybe you've got no children, you're not married, you know, you don't have a wide family circle, or even a massive circle of friends that are near to you. Perhaps your friends live a long way away, so you feel a bit isolated, you're unwell, so you're vulnerable anyway. You want to feel that you've got the assistance of the medical profession in either pain alleviation or some kind of treatment to help you, and you go with that wish and you get offered, the best you can get offered is, well, have you thought about assisted dying? Can you imagine how just utterly depressing and brutal, and just what that would do to you at the time that you actually need the support, and they're offering this as a treatment. That's what it comes down to. They're saying it is an NHS treatment. A treatment is not something designed to kill you. I know treatments can kill. It's unfortunate, you know, people have trials and all sorts of things, but this is a specific thing designed to kill you, being offered up as a treatment. This isn't a treatment. This is not an NHS treatment.
On that note, that Kim Ledbetter actually put in an amendment to the NHS Act 2006, I think it is.
Tabled last week.
She put it in 2 minutes before the deadline on the Thursday before the last week of discussions, to say that to change the NHS Act so that assisted dying would be treated as an improvement in health.
Yeah.
Under the bill.
This is what's diabolical about it. And makes me think they never had any intention of not widening it. And equally, they never had any intention of ring fencing it or putting any safeguards in. And I just, the other thing that I have issues with are the proxy side of things, where a proxy could sign off for you. A person of good standing, you know, in the community can actually go and, instead of you signing off for it, for whatever reason you can't do it, they can. So this opens up the whole duress and the lack of capacity arguments again. And listen, you only need to spend a very short time in the legal profession to see the amount of family, not even, you know, let alone carers, that are involved in doing some awful things for money. Mm-hmm. So, and that's why we have to be so alive in the legal profession to these kind of things. I just find it staggering that this has all been brushed under the carpet. You are going to allow a proxy to sign somebody off. What if it, like I said, where does the liability come then when we find out the person signed off was being financially abused by that carer, by a carer that got the proxy to sign it? Is the proxy in trouble? Does the proxy face any prosecution? What happens? Can you imagine trying to unpick this as a family member of somebody that it's happened to, especially given how the issues we have already with when end of life care goes wrong? Okay, so we're not even talking about people opting for the dying process, but we've had palliative care, if you like, that's gone wrong, or end of life care that's been given too early. It's 5 or 6 years before anyone in the system that's trying to deal with that can get to a coroner's court or can get through a case, and it's really hard, and we still haven't learnt lessons about how that's gone very wrong, and we're jumping now into doing something like this.
Please sign up to receive our newsletter and you'll be notified of UKMFA campaigns, open letters, calls to action and any important updates. You can do this on our website at ukmedfreedom.org. That's ukmedfreedom.org.
And if you were really cynical, you might say that maybe this is going to cover up or like bring it under this umbrella all the stuff that we've seen going on over the last 5 years with the abuse of the end-of-life protocols, with the do not resuscitate orders often put on people with no consultation. We heard at the Scottish People's COVID Inquiry a lady talking about how her 41-year-old brother had gone into hospital during one of these lockdown periods in 2021, and he'd had diarrhea and dehydration. But very quickly he was put on a ventilator. I mean, you know, seriously, none of his family were allowed to accompany him. He was alone. Tragically, he died. But when she went through the medical notes, he'd been signed up to a trial and his signature had been forged. I mean, you know, so this is the abuse that's already happening. But then you kind of feel like, is this going to be the way that they kind of take liability off everybody?
Can I bring up another concern? Sorry, just going back to the panel, because I think the panel is actually quite key here, because surely they should be asking the same questions that you two have just been raising. The panel itself should be raising those so they can be sure that what they're signing off is correct. But they're not obliged to. Ian. No, that's what I was going to say. And also the quality of the panel. How do we assure that the panel is of the highest calibre? And also, given, and you raised this, Claire, earlier about, you know, checking backgrounds and antecedents and all that kind of thing. When you've got the police at the moment being recruited without background checks, if they can do that with our police, they can do that with anyone in a position of power. And so therefore, if they're under pressure to put these panels together because they haven't got the human resources to do it, they could take, it sounds awful, but literally anyone that puts themselves up for it, because the remuneration is good for them, you know.
And I feel that this is going to become an ideologically, you know, driven thing. So you almost are going to self-select for people who fundamentally believe in this, you know, possibly to quite an extreme level. And, you know, there was another amendment that was trying to stop doctor shopping, because you would have thought with this that if you go to a doctor and say, I want assisted suicide, and he says, and he does all your history examination, talks to you, and it says, I'm sorry, you don't meet the criteria. Well, that should be the end of it. But no, you're able to go from doctor to doctor to doctor. And of course, if they then bring private companies into this, you know, where is going to be any incentive for somebody to say no to an applicant? You know, because why would you not just say yes to every applicant? I mean, that's how it feels.
They even went one stage further, didn't they, with that? So not only did they say, well, you can just keep doctor shopping until you find someone that ticks you off, which smacks of this whole process is nothing to do with whether you're really being assessed. Mm-hmm. It's just ticking the yes box. But they even went one stage further by saying that the doctor, if the doctor had, like you said, had said, well, no, I'm sorry, I don't agree with assisted dying, so I don't want to be a part of it, had to then refer that person to a doctor that was willing to be a part of it. That isn't that essentially, so one doctor's saying, I don't think you meet the criteria and you don't need it and we can get you better palliative care, and anyway I wouldn't be willing to be a part of it. Doesn't that then smack of, well, I have to refer you to another doctor? Just smacks of, let's get you onto that pathway.
Yes, we'll get you on the pathway some way.
Yeah.
But that's very open to corruption, isn't it? There as well.
Of course.
You know, it opens a complete minefield there, because and corruption could go all the way up from that level right up to the board that signs it off. And peer pressure makes people do things that sometimes they wouldn't ordinarily do as well.
Well, we know the state of NHS whistleblowing, you know, as well, if things aren't being done properly, if it was an NHS-based service, and we're still not clear, as Liz said, there's just nothing nailed down. We've got this kind of private company thing rolling around the background because the funding isn't there, really. The palliative care funding will be is bad, and if then assisted dying is going to be a bigger drain. So where is that money going to come from if it's not going to come out of palliative care funding, which is bad? I think they only get about 20 to 30% funding from the NHS. The rest is donations and fundraising themselves. And that's why I think there's been this kind of alluding to, actually, it won't be an NHS pathway. It won't be like bolted on as an NHS pathway. It will be a kind of doctor referral into a private company. Then is where there I started saying to myself, where's the exchange of money then? Does the doctor get paid for referring to the private company?
Well, I was thinking that all along,
No,
and also because you've got I mean, even if it wasn't that, surely if someone's not going through a palliative care pathway, which costs an absolute arm and a leg and beyond, surely assisted dying actually ends up being a saving, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's cheaper.
Yeah, so
Absolutely.
So therefore, they encourage a lot more people to go through the assisting dying pathway, even if you've got a private company involved, because ultimately, when they do the budgets, they'll show a huge saving. You know, same as they do in the benefit system and anything else. You know, any excuse to take someone off of whatever pathway they're on and put them on the cheaper one.
Well, you mentioned a really good point, Ian. So let's just look at something that Liz said and what you've just said about the benefit system as well. So Liz mentioned about the Scottish COVID inquiry and said, I think it was a lady's brother that had gone into hospital and ended up being put on a trial and his signature had been forged. Now, we know that there was a lot of improper things that went on during lockdown, and they were much, much worse because there was no family. It's come out in other ways as well. And a lot of that was down to the fact that you didn't have family oversight. You didn't have advocating for families. You couldn't get into the hospitals. You couldn't challenge doctors. You couldn't challenge protocols. So we are mirroring that with this assisted dying bill by saying no family involvement, you can't challenge, and doctors can even do it on the telephone or video consultation. So we're already back in the position that we were in during lockdown, where we had all of these problems and things went wrong, very wrong for a lot of people. You mentioned, Ian, you know, it's cheaper to put them on to this end of life, and budget wise it looks fantastic for these trusts or whatever, and benefits. And you've picked up on a really good point, because look at where we are now with the assisted dying bill. All oversight, family oversight stripped out of it. You're not allowed to be involved at the same time as they're just about to implement the biggest welfare cuts to disabled people that we have ever had. I just think it's a perfect storm, and we could end up with real problems, not only on the basis that the disabled people themselves are that have been put back into actually quite extreme poverty, you know, in some instances, are going to be thinking, I've got no choice, I can't live like this, I'm going to end up just picking that out of desperation. But not only that, we've got a kind of institutional view that disabled people or those with illnesses are pretty worthless because we're going to take away their benefits and we're not going to help them. So that is an institutional view of pushing them into, it's that utilitarian view, isn't it? You're not worth anything, so go. And I think you can educate that mindset to people through the medical profession, and you get medical professionals that almost think that they're doing everybody a favour, that the public at large aren't having to pay benefits, the disabled person hasn't got a very good life anyway, so, you know, make that arbitrary decision, they can go on it. And it ticks all, like you said, I hate to say that it could come back down to that money side of things, but I can so see that happening.
Yeah. And I think, you know, this is why medical ethics are so important and why they have to stay permanent and strong always in all circumstances, because what happens is the minute you start this moral kind of decline, it snowballs, doesn't it? And it's like, you know, we see this in Canada. We know homeless people and disabled people and people on benefits have been offered MAID as a perfectly valid option. It's like, well, you know, we can't get you a flat, but, you know, we could sort out your assisted dying. It won't cost your estate anything, and, you know, problem solved. You know, it's like people, it's very easy to be sort of swept down this sort of dystopian slope. And actually, you know, this is this sort of impression that came across to me that this is all an ideology now. This is not actually about just trying to solve a problem and creating a solution which is, for these, there are very few people actually, according to palliative care consultants, who do have an undignified and painful death. If it was about that, we wouldn't have seen what happened during the committee stages and the rejection of all the amendments and the indecent rush with which it was carried out. I mean, it was so rushed through. As you said, they actually could have done 5 more sessions. There were so many shenanigans going on. I wrote some of them down. So there was Naj Shah, who was speaking so brilliantly, and she's a Labour MP, has hearing aids, and she had told the whole sort of team, I cannot stay till 10 o'clock at night because my hearing aids run out after 17 hours. So I won't be able to participate. I'm going to have to leave. And in the last week, they insisted on running one of the hearings to 10, and she had to leave early. So you had one of the strongest voices. But it's just things like that, which is just so actually really just a horrible way to treat somebody. And you think, this is not showing the supporters of the bill in good character.
And doesn't that show how they regard disabled people then?
Exactly, and this was kind of her point. But then you also saw there was a big argument on the last day about where assisted dying could take place, and there was the assumption, or there was the hope, that we could, care homes and hospices could either be an opt-in or an opt-out. Like if it was, if you had, say, a Christian hospice that didn't want any of this, they would just advertise themselves as a, assisted dying free zone. And then you'd have hospices that really believed in it, and they could advertise themselves that way, and the customer could go and choose. But it would mean that if you were like, say, you and I, we could choose a hospice or a care home that we knew didn't participate in this, because imagine how terrifying it would be when you're towards the end of your life, you're very vulnerable, and you've got the assisted dying team turning up to bump off your next door neighbour. And, suddenly autonomy didn't matter anymore. And Kim Ledbetter and her sort of colleagues were utterly against any ability for a private institution to be able to choose that, and were basically saying, well, you would need to withdraw their public funding.
It's horrific, absolutely horrific. I assume this wouldn't extend to private care homes because they're not. Okay, let's be clear.
Public funding.
Let's be clear here, though, about this, because private care homes might not technically be publicly funded, but they do offer a number of local authority funded beds, and I suspect will be exactly the same where we were in lockdown. If you don't take these people from the hospital that we want to kick out at the beginning, we'll take your local authority funding for your beds away. And then how could you, given everything that went on in care homes during lockdown, how could you, we've got 40,000 missing care home workers since the jab mandate, so they're even more understaffed than they were 5 years ago. And the vast majority are actually staffed by low-paid workers that actually come from other countries because, English people don't want to do the job and be paid the wages. So those people might, not have a full grasp of the legal system and what they're supposed to do or not do with regards to assisted dying, or there might even be some minor language barriers and we are going to say that care homes can do this, can't opt out of it.
Yeah, and I think that's the sort of totalitarian sort of mindset, isn't it? That you're not happy that just, this is an option that's available in a sort of, in a marketplace where, that's the free market economy, isn't it? Where if you've got a service that people want, they'll pay for it, and if they don't, they won't. They're not happy with that. They want everyone to have it. It's like
have to offer it in closed. Can you imagine? Back in lockdown, similar situation. We had this. All your grannies locked away, or your mums, or your whatever.
Yeah, I mean that would be a disaster, wouldn't it, if we had another lockdown?
Can you imagine? Yeah. I mean, maybe there's a glimmer of hope on the horizon, and I don't know if I shared it with you yesterday. I put it on our Telegram channel. There was an article in the Mirror and then it was reproduced in several newspapers, headlined "Tip to Collapse, MPs backing assisted dying are bracing for the legislation to collapse amid fury over the handling of the bill, amid concerns over a lack of safeguards such as scrapping the requirement for a High Court judge to approve applications." Now, that was a headline yesterday. Now, I don't know what the truth of that is, but apparently there are some Labour MPs that said, we voted yes at the second reading, and given what we've seen, we will be voting no at the third. I don't want to rely on that as being the case, and I want people to still write to their MPs and bring up all of these issues. What I didn't like about that particular article was that it repeated the line, which I think is untrue, that 70% of the UK public are in favour of assisted dying. Now, I think that might be true if you just ask them if people should be allowed to take their own life if they want to, or have an assisted death. What it's not saying is that 70% of people are in favour of the bill as it's drafted to deliver that. And those people that perhaps think, well, it's not my business to tell somebody that they can't do whatever, don't necessarily know all of the things that we have discussed very briefly here, that you've talked about before, that you've put into articles, that I've put into articles. And I think if people were more aware of that, they would be horrified.
Find out more about the UK Medical Freedom Alliance on our website. That's at ukmedfreedom.org. That's ukmedfreedom.org, where you'll find all the information you need around open letters, our campaigns, our legal template letters, and of course, even these podcasts. You'll find details of the latest one, and you'll be able to access the previous ones too via the links there. Find out more about our team. Sign up for our newsletter. It's all there, and you can even donate too.
I've been quite interested watching the press over there during the hearings, and I have noticed there's a noticeable shift. I think public opinion has changed. You know, the Time was talking about the, outrageously rushed process, and there was a more detailed poll done on the public, which actually showed that if they were asked about details of this bill, it was only about 11%. You've got Labour MPs, 26 MPs who wrote expressing their outrage about the High Court judge being dropped. So I think there is, because the media has been covering it. I mean, I tend to read the Telegraph, but the Times has also kind of come out against. And also Esther Ranson, has survived 2 years. And she's still going strong, and she's now saying she's loving her life at the moment, and she's on this great drug. But she was, 2 years ago, she was promoting assisted dying because she only had 6 months to live. So I think there's a lot that's happened, and I do think that actually Kim Ledbetter, they went for broke. They weren't just satisfied to cope with a compromise bill, which I think they could have got through, and that would have been their toe in the door. But actually they went for broke, and they wanted everything now, and they wanted it as wide as possible. They wanted they did the slippery slope, over the 7 weeks, which was just astonishing, because other countries have taken a few years to go down the slippery slope. And I think, it's like the expression, the devil is in the detail. And I think when we looked at the detail, my goodness, the devil was in there. And Danny Kruger in particular really highlighted that. And it's very hard for them to come back from the scrutiny that they got and the amazing speeches he did. I mean, I really encourage everyone to go and have a look at them and share it with their MP. And we're going to publish a template letter, and actually it's got 2 really good sort of tables, which has been put together by Dan Hitchens on Twitter. And one is a list of all the safeguarding amendments that were voted down in black, and then about the 7 or 8 that were put through, so people can actually see what was rejected, really sensible ones. And he put together another really good table showing the panel in numbers. So the power to summon witnesses, 0. Need for witnesses to speak on oath, 0. Sanctions for non-cooperation, 0. And it goes through, and you start to realise, oh my goodness, this doesn't sound very sensible. All these sensible ideas that you would expect, you see that this is not how it's going to be. So, and I think even just sending those to your MP, we'll put them within a letter format and put it on our website. I think they're very powerful sort of evidence that this bill is not fit for purpose. Whatever your views on assisted dying, this is not the bill, and this is an absolutely diabolical bill. It has to be halted. And so, yeah, I think we've got to assume that the deadline is the 25th of April. We just need people to just, send a letter to their MP. Try to make it personal. You don't have to put tons of stuff in, but you don't want to just have, cut and paste and send, because they don't actually then take them seriously. I sent my MP her, who did vote no. So find out what your MP voted as well. So my MP voted yes last time. So I wrote it saying, I know you voted yes last time and we've had previous correspondence, but actually I've been watching the hearings, and have you seen what a dog's dinner this bill is? And, can I just point this out to you? And please, can you, this is not the bill. Please, can you vote against it? And I'm convinced, and the other thing is, of course, there were 60 MPs that didn't vote last time, because there's 100, so 60 or 70 MPs abstained or weren't there. So I think we can quite easily turn this around. I'm really hopeful as well, Claire.
Yeah, and I just, it's really important, and I know that there are so many people, and I completely understand and in lots of ways agree with them when they say there is no point in me going to my MP, everything's, a joke now. However, on this particular issue, I wouldn't tell people to do it if I didn't think it could make a difference, because I really do think that there is a chance that we can actually make history. A bill has not been struck out on its third reading since 1977. Wow. And this was something to do with infrastructure and the railways, I think, at that point. So it is possible, but it does require us engaging in the process and making sure that our MPs are aware of what has happened at committee stage and why this bill is not the thing to deliver assisted dying. Whether or not there will ever be a bill that can, I don't think there can, but that's not what we're saying to the MPs. We're saying this one definitely can't do it. Look at all of this, and it's really important that we do that, especially the ones that, like you said, Liz, if you can find out if your MP was one that voted yes to this bill, it's more important that you get in touch, because as I've said, a lot of those MPs actually only voted yes to give it a chance to see what those safeguards would be, and you will be helping them by showing them that there are no safeguards, as well. If your MP abstained or wasn't there at the second reading, it's equally important. And I mean, even some that voted hardline yes might change their mind after all of this. So it's very easy to find out what your MP voted, because you can just do an internet search and it will give you the details. It's really easy to find out who your MP is as well. And I will put in my Substack a link to Liz's template letter. I think is it Care Not Killing that have also got a template letter?
And Right to Life,
one of those two.
Well. There's lots of options.
Lots of options. There's I think a couple of Christian groups have got letters. I'll quickly put the only reason I'll do a different letter is then people have got the chance to use different letters, because as Liz said, if MPs get the same letter over and over again, they treat it a bit like spam and don't take it seriously. So it is important to personalise it. But I'll also put in the Substack the link to where people can find their MP and where they can find how their MP voted. We have only got till the 25th of April, and what are we now? The 24th of March, so just over a month.
Yeah.
Just over a month.
So yeah, we need, and recess actually is on the 9th. So actually, really, I think we have till the 9th.
Yeah.
Then they'll be going away, won't they? And I saw this morning Christian Concern are proposing doing another rally outside Parliament, which will, as they said, will probably be on the Friday, the 25th of April, and encouraging people to turn up even on the day to try to encourage MPs to vote.
To vote no. Yeah, I mean, as we've said, there's so many things that we could have talked about today that are concerning with the bill. over and above what we've just said, but there is just so much. You couldn't fit it into an hour or an hour and 10 minutes chat, could you? There's just so much of it. But this is one of, a lot of the legislation deeply troubles me at the moment, but this really does raise the hairs on my neck.
Yeah, and we'll put your Substack on the notes under this, and link to our campaign page and things. So yeah, brilliant.
Ian, what do you think about it all and where we are? Have you got any thoughts at all?
I'm just shocked by the whole process, and I know I sound like a broken record because I spoke about the Geneva stroke Switzerland style, assisted dying stuff over there, and it's so very different there actually. And when I talk to my partner about that, and because she's grown up with it, it's taken her a while to get her head around the fact that what we're talking about in this country and also in Canada is very, very different. I'm still not going to say I support it in Switzerland, but it is a very, very different way of doing things. Liz and I did actually look at the, I think, a Dignitas site and, pointed out a couple of things there which are still extremely worrying. But this whole business of accountability is the biggest thing for me as well, because I don't know who's going to take control of this and how we could possibly trust them to do the right thing for people. And as you say, so many holes. It's very concerning. It wasn't like there weren't ways of helping people in their end of life path anyway. So things have been in place for years, which seem to be working fine. So I'm a suspicious old Hector when I see things like this, think, no, there's another agenda going on here. So anyway.
I personally think it would be an absolute disaster for people, all but a few people involved, and very traumatic for the families afterwards if they're trying to seek some kind of redress. We don't know where the accountability is going to lie and how that's going to be dealt with.
Yeah, and Danny Kruger made an amazing speech where he said this bill would impose on everyone this new reality. It will change life and death for everyone, introducing the idea that our individual worth lies in our utility, valuable for only so long as we are useful, not a burden, not a cost, and not making a mess. And I think so this is why it should concern everyone.
What I'm also surprised at is the lack of strong voices from religious leaders. We've got Christian Concern and we've got people on the peripheries, but the actual leaders themselves, the heads of the various religions around the UK, they're not speaking out. They're not saying anything in a strong fashion that I can see. Which
there were some bishops who wrote a letter before the second reading, and the Catholic Church put out a statement a long time ago. So I was looking into this, but you're right. It's not. They should be the ones on all the news programmes and quoted in the newspapers, but they're not. So it's left to people like us.
Right.
You could also argue the same about the really big charities that are supposed to act in the interest of older people. So you've got Age UK, you've got the Alzheimer's Society. I don't know where they're standing on this, because though they're, if you like, clientele, their demographic that they deal with are particularly vulnerable to this bill, given that we could have proxies, given that you can have an advocate, given that there's no family involvement. Where are their voices?
I think we could probably have a very long conversation about charities at some point, but it's probably not UK. It's probably not UKMFA's remit, but we'll have an offline chat about that.
Well, I think they've proven probably what we would be chatting about by their silence in this. But this is a very serious piece of legislation. I'm not trying to say that other pieces of legislation aren't serious, but this is potentially going to be, if this passes, the biggest change, I think, in society, aside from lockdown legislation. It will be the worst piece of legislation we've had since the health regulations, and then almost vaccine mandates.
Yeah.
And it's a massive attack on medical ethics. I don't think medical ethics and the doctor-patient relationship will come back from that. It's interesting talking about informed consent. They're not interested in informed consent even. There was an amendment to make it a duty for the doctors to explain they might have complications from the drugs. That amendment was rejected.
Yeah, so that clearly shows they're not interested in informed
Care about
consent.
informed consent, you know. So, and people are not guaranteed a safe, pain-free, easy, quick death through this, and they're making sure that they're not told that. That should just be a red flag to everybody.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you. Really good. Another wonderful hour. We've gone over time again, but so what? We don't care. We can talk for hours. No, thanks ever so much again. Folks, those of you watching, all the links will be in the description below to all the documentation, to the various websites, telegrams, X's, etc. And I look forward to doing all this again very soon.
Well, let's hope after the 25th of April we come back saying it's been shut down, it's good news, but let's, I think it opens up wider discussions, like Liz said, about medical ethics in the long run, and where we're headed.
Absolutely.
But thanks very much for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on, Claire. I love talking to you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.